Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. We are here from The Niche Case, theniche-case.com, home of fabulous Aotearoa sporting content and yarn. Today's podcast, we got some Super Smash, last weekend of Super Smash cricket, so we're going to preview all that action on the men's and women's side. We got football is going bonkers right now. We got the Wellington Phoenix on fire. All Whites need a coach. Flying Kiwis is sizzling as per usual. The Breakers. Big weekend of Breakers basketball, a celebration of them returning into NBL finals. They got 2 games this weekend before finals, and they need to. A couple of good performances would be fantastic, but it's a good chance to just check in with the Breakers and watch a whole lot of Breakers basketball and learn about the Breakers before they enter NBL finals. And got a little bit of rugby league over in New South Wales with the SG Ball under-19 competition starting up. Got a Warriors team. They are playing the Rabbitohs, but I'm just going to do a couple of key notes from the first round of SG Ball footy, hard and fast for the rugby league freaks. First, I just want to set this all up with a bit of warm-up korero, because two of the teams we're talking about in this podcast, the Wellington Blaze women's cricket team and the Aotearoa Breakers, exceptional. Blaze have won multiple Super Smash titles. Breakers have won multiple NBL titles, and they spring to mind as two of the dynastic Aotearoa sporting organizations. Is there another team that comes to mind, Wildcard, that exists in that realm? Off the top of my head, I was thinking Crusaders, even though it's weird to call them the Crusaders, given all the history of the Crusaders and their crusades across the world. It feels weird saying it, so I might just flip it up to the Crucizzlers or something like that, because it just feels yucky to write and speak about the Canterbury men's Super Rugby team.
That's okay, because they changed their logo, so it's fine now.
Oh, okay. So the Crusaders.
And I think they might have got rid of the guys on the horses. I'm not sure.
What kind of Crusaders are they now? Just.
I don't think that's been specified. I'm not actually sure that was in the press release. So it might have needed to be a follow-up question.
Let's just swing back to the Crucizzlers. I did like the Crucizzlers.
I quite like that too.
No disrespect to the Canterbury men's Super Rugby team, because they are another dynastic organization, multiple Super Rugby titles in a row. And I was looking on Wikipedia, when the COVID hit and the whole Super Rugby structure changed, the Crucizzlers were still there at the top. So I think the way their organization operates, the success they have, I think, is right there with the Wellington Blaze and the Breakers. Not necessarily they are the dynasty right now, although the Crucizzlers and the Wellington Blaze have that argument. The Breakers dipped off for a while, but they are the elite dynastic Aotearoa sporting organizations. Is there anything else that pops into your mind for your sporting perusal?
Well, I'm sure there's plenty that I'll forget, but just off the top of my head, thinking about it, definitely Wellington Saints basketball would be in that conversation. Just before we recorded, just finished watching old Auckland City's latest efforts at the FIFA Club World Cup. Definitely Auckland City. I mean, for a long time they've been, because that's the thing. Some of the Blades weren't always as good at cricket as they are now, and there's Crusaders have always been pretty good, but these things do fluctuate. I think the best example is the Breakers. Last 5 years have not been like they were when they were in their proper dynasty mold before that. But Auckland City, pretty much since they've existed, have been the what do you call it, the standard bearer for domestic Kiwi football, and that continues to this day. They won every trophy they competed for last season, pretty much, or 4 major trophies. They won them all. They won the Chatham Cup, they won the Northern League, they won the Oceania competition, they won the National League. They're pretty good. And I don't know if this is a little bit of a stretch, maybe it is, but I'm kind of tempted to throw in very recent era Black Caps into that as well. When you think about, they only won one thing, so that's why I'm saying it's a stretch, and it might be more compared to the Black Caps' previous history rather than to world cricket's previous history. Like, not comparing them to the great teams of India or England or Australia over the years, more just comparing the Black Caps to the Black Caps in the past. But they have won. They have made like what is this, 1, 2, 3, 4 straight semi-finals in ODI World Cups, including 2 straight finals. One of them they drew. They won a Test World Championship thingamajig. They made a T20 World Cup final.
3.
You know,
3 in a row. T20 World Cup semi-finals.
3 semi-finals in a row with a final in the middle of that. Yeah. That's all. As far as like I say, it doesn't compare to Glenn McGrath, Shane Warne era Australia. Like, that is the dynasty of recent world cricket. But Black Caps compared to previous Black Caps units is a dynasty from that perspective. But yeah, I don't know. It's just it popped into my head while I was thinking about this.
I want to get this very clear out there in the open. I'm going with 4 teams, and the Black Caps aren't in that group. And I appreciate the gist of your idea, but I'm not putting the Black Caps as a dynastic Aotearoa sporting team or organization.
Yeah, it's a thought experiment more than a fact. Yeah.
Hold the experiment though. So big ups. We got the Wellington Blaze, we got the Canterbury Crusizzlers, we've got the Aotearoa Breakers, and we've got Auckland City FC. I do like the Auckland City FC. They're a true Kiwi sporting dynasty, and I think that's Aotearoa sporting elite right there. And it's important for today's podcast because the Wellington Blaze are competing for another Super Smash championship. They are undefeated this season. They were undefeated last season. So they're doing dynastic things. And as you mentioned, the Breakers, bit of a tough patch in recent years, returned to Aotearoa after a pandemic spent in Australia, back in the finals. And it just all looks so easy, so comfortable. A lot of the players talking about like this is where the Breakers belong, and I like that. I like that dynastic Aotearoa sporting mana, and that's what the Breakers are showing. You did mention the Black Caps, and big up the Patreon podcast. The Patreon podcast earlier in this week, we discussed the reactions and the differences in reaction between the Black Caps in Pakistan and the Black Caps in India. So if you are a member of the Patreon podcast, or the Patreon whānau, check out that Patreon podcast. And if you would like to support the Niche Cache and all our content, join the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/our Niche Cache, EL Niche Cache. Because I do like the ideas we chuck up in that Patreon podcast, and it does, I just like that podcast, and there's a bit of value there for the Patreon whānau to enjoy, and it is a different space for Niche Cache listeners and those who enjoy our content. It's a different space for us to explore some ideas, and I'd like to double down on that observation of the difference in reaction, because the Black Caps lost the 3rd T20 to India this morning, and you look around, both Kiwi mainstream media sites are Black Caps suffer record defeat. Oh my God. Like, those are major headlines in New Zealand. Then you go to Cricinfo, which is more Indian centric and T20 centric. And it's like, should New Zealand be concerned about their white ball form? It's like, a few weeks ago, we just defeated Pakistan in ODI cricket. I'm not concerned, because we're the best Super League nation in the world as well. And we always make World Cup semi-finals. Like, it's a very fascinating situation. Obviously, you could, and we discussed this on the Patreon podcast, you could point to the Indian-Pakistan rivalry and some of those deeper in the mangroves cricketing and political ideas. But this is a certified Black Caps B outfit that is playing in India. And yeah, no surprises when Ben Lister, Blair Tickner, Jacob Duffy, and Henry Shipley are conceding 10 runs and over, and Indian batters in their home conditions are smacking all sorts of runs. Like, what do you expect? It's a development exercise for those bowlers. It's a development exercise for the Black Caps. The Black Caps told us. They communicated with us. They sent messaging to us as Kiwi cricket fans. this Indian tour is not as important as the Pakistan tour. Because old mate Williamson's not there, old mate Southey's not there. They're on a break. And if Trent Boult was available, he wouldn't be there either. He'd be on a break, right? Like, the Black Caps told us all we need to know about this series. And when the Black Caps were taking things mad seriously against Pakistan in World Cup Super League games, they defeated Pakistan in Pakistan. So, yeah, I'm taking some development notes. Yeah, I'm like, following who's doing what and just in preparation for the World Cup. Yeah, I'm tracking the Fennell and stuff because I think there's a plan in place and some of those ideas are relevant. But I don't care about this Indian tour at all. But it seems like not a lot of people do, but it seems like a lot of Black Caps opinions are being based on a tour that they told us isn't as important as the Pakistan stuff. And then, like, any questions about the Black Caps white ball teams from this Indian series and from this Indian tour are kind of weird when literally a week before the Indian ODIs, they defeated Pakistan. It's like, okay, yeah, the form's bad because they lost to India, but the form was pretty good like a week earlier when the Black Caps had their first 11 in operation. It's been very interesting, very rather fascinating, and we went deep into those ideas on the Patreon podcast. So that's the kind of stuff we yarn about weekly in the Patreon podcast.
Yeah, and not that long ago, a pretty strong Black Caps ODI team won their first ever ODI series in the West Indies as well. Like, regardless of what anyone thinks about the state of the West Indies, playing away from home is difficult, and it's clearly more difficult for the Black Caps than other places if they'd never ever won an ODI series there before, and they did that. And I think it might have been their first ever ODI series win in Pakistan as well. At least it would have been the first for a while because they haven't been to Pakistan for a long time. Those are the times when they're showing us that they care, and when they do, because they're picking top strength teams, and when they do very well. I do like the idea of if Trent Boult was available, he still wouldn't be available. Was nice. It reminded me of a joke I heard in a movie the other day where a dude goes to a cafe and orders a coffee without cream, and the waiter says, "I'm sorry, sir, we're all out of cream. Would you like it without milk instead?" And then it's being available without being available. I don't know. Who cares if they get thrashed by India in T20s when they're picking a bowling lineup that would probably go for 200 in a Super Smash game as well? Like, what's the big deal?
I don't know. Shipley's a Super Smash legend. Ben Listers.
Well, they're all good individual Super Smash bowlers, but
they're also
Super Smash still has high scoring games there too. Chuck them at Pukakura Park,
Like, there was a thing I saw about Lockie Ferguson being the leader of the Black Caps bowling attack, and it's like, yeah, he's the only dude who's played like 20 plus games or whatever. Like, this is a B grade seam attack. All due respect, those are future Black Caps. Well, they are Black Caps now, but they are going to play decent roles for the Black Caps in the future, but they're just gathering experience in India. And the other crystal clear idea I have around this is, so Kane Williamson bats number 3 in Test cricket, ODI cricket, and T20 cricket. I'd also point out that the Black Caps have made 3 consecutive T20 World Cup semi-finals with Kane Williamson batting number 3, and he's the best batter in that team, so chill out. But that's a different idea. But Black Caps cricket, so we mentioned the seam attack, right? The Black Caps cricket looks a lot different when you got Kane Williamson batting number 3 compared to Henry Nicholls batting number 3 in the ODIs and Mark Chapman. Mark Chapman's not in form. Mark Chapman hasn't scored any runs in domestic cricket this summer, and he's your number 3. What does everyone talk about Henry Nicholls? Oh, he's out of form. He's not doing anything. He'll score a century when he needs to. He's a fringe first 11 cricketer, and he's batting number 3. Like, that is the batting equivalent of the seam attack stuff. And it's, again, hot and bothered, humid. Kiwi summer. We got rain. We got Black Caps headlines about meaningless cricket in India. It's all very strange. But we're here from the Niche Cache, and we are chatting about Aotearoa sport. big up the Patreon whānau. We do appreciate all your support, and we try to jam those podcasts every week as hard as possible. And those podcasts are also available via Substack subscription and Buy Me a Coffee subscription as well. The Buy Me a Coffee is buymeacoffee.com/the niche cache, and English as opposed to Spanish for the Patreon. And also we deliver our Substack email news every Monday and Friday evening. A lot of my SG Ball notes that I'm whipping up in a couple of minutes, going deep in the Friday email newsletter. Those are the type of things we yarn about in the email newsletter via Substack, thenichecase.substack.com. And you can also sign up as a subscription to access those Patreon podcasts as well. So we've got the website, theniche-case.com. We've got the podcast that you're listening to or watching on YouTube. We've got the Substack twice a week email newsletter dispatch. You can make a donation via Buy Me a Coffee, and also you can just be a lovely person and enjoy all our content without doing anything else. It's all good. We're just here for the love of Aotearoa and the love of Aotearoa sport, mindfulness. Let us into the realms.
I scooped this one up from just an article I was reading the other day. A quote from a Portuguese philosopher called Jose Ortega y Gasset, who I Google searched the quote and I could find nothing that said he actually said it. So I don't know if it's a apocryphal thing, or if maybe it's just the translation is different, or if it was paraphrased rather than quoted exactly. But I liked the way it was paraphrased, so I'm going with that, where dude supposedly said, "We are all lost creatures. It is only when we admit this that we have a chance of finding ourselves."
Beauty. I think that was quite a simple one, and we're stretched for time, so I'm just going to keep it moving. We'll let that simmer. Can you repeat that one more time?
We are all lost creatures. It is only when we admit this that we have a chance of finding ourselves. So suppose if you don't admit it, then you are ultimately in the illusion still, aren't you? If you're in the illusion, you can't break out of it because you don't know that you're in the illusion. You have to admit you're in the illusion in order to remove the illusion, and then you start fixing things. There you go.
Let me fire off a couple of ideas from the opening round of SG Ball team lists. The first is that most of the Kiwi-NRL juniors that I know of in the SG Ball team lists, a lot of them played first 15 rugby. And I was thinking about this. This is very different to the when the Warriors signed Conrad Hurrell, Nani Laumape, Solomon Ikata, those type of characters. They were recruited from first 15 rugby to play under 20s with little to no rugby league experience. All the first 15 dudes that I'm tracking at the junior levels, well, not all of them, but a lot of them do share first 15 and rugby league junior experience. So these ideas of first 15 rugby and rugby league, rugby union, rugby league being separate entities is completely false. Francis Manulelua, he is named at centre for the Penrith Panthers. Interestingly, he was also named in the Panthers Jersey flag squad, which is under 21s, but he's starting the season in under 19, so start at centre for the Panthers, and then he'll probably finish SG Ball, go on to play a full season at Jersey flag. He has an illustrious background in rugby league and rugby union. Those are the type of characters that are making up a lot of these Kiwi NRL junior ranks. So whatever old school ideas you had around rugby union and rugby league, let it go, release it. Because these two sports are intertwined with how talented these young lads are. Same thing with the women. Shout out to all the women rugby league players, probably deserve some actual rights with the NRL, maybe they can sort that out for just some actual rights, some genuine rights and contract stuff. That would be fantastic for them. But a lot of those women are currently playing rugby union and rugby league. Mele Haufunga was a star of the World Cup for the Aotearoa Kiwi Ferns. She was playing Super Rugby and Rugby League on the same weekends. Well, not Super Rugby. She was playing Club Rugby and Club Rugby League on the same weekends. She also played Super Rugby earlier in the year. Same with Caitlin Vahaakolo. She was playing for the Auckland Wharapama Cup team and also playing Rugby League for Auckland, Akarana. Men and women are playing both codes seamlessly. Melbourne Storm. They got Dicky Terapo named on the wing. He was playing first 15 for St. Kitts last year, and he's an Otara Scorpions Rugby League junior. So keep this trend in mind when your old mate's saying, oh, like rugby union versus rugby league, rah, rah, rah. They're intertwined. So it's all good. The other trend that I've spotted in this first round is a lot of Canterbury talent. I've talked about on last Friday's email newsletter, I talked about Oliver Lowry and the West Tigers. He is starting at halfback for the Balmain Tigers SG Ball team. He was playing first 15 rugby in Canterbury and rugby league. He played South Island under 20s rugby league while also being in the Junior Crusaders Academy. Shout out to him. He's playing against the Sharks, and the Sharks have Felix Fa'atili, also from Christchurch. Lowry, I think, is a Hallswell junior. Fa'atili is a Hornby junior, and Felix Fa'atili was playing with Wynnum Manly last season up in Queensland. So he has now moved to the Sharks, and he is a starting prop for the Sharks SG Ball team. We've also got Matthew Longapati. He is starting at centre from the Melbourne Storm, another decorated rugby league junior from Canterbury. I believe he is a Linwood junior. And then we got the Warriors. And they have Tanner Stowers Smith. He was also in the Junior Crusaders Academy last year. And he is starting prop for the Warriors SG Ball team. So there are at least 4 rugby league and like also first 15 juniors from Canterbury playing SG Ball footy this weekend, and likely to play a whole lot more SG Ball footy as well. Tanner Stowers Smith, Oliver Lowry, Matthew Longapati, and Felix Fa'atili. And it's all there in the SG Ball. So for those who are curious, the Warriors are playing against the Rabbitohs over in Sydney. Pretty decent team. See how they go, and we'll keep tracking that talent, but don't sleep on all the Kiwi-NRL talent in the SG Ball at the moment. Boom.
Beauty. I'm particularly, I mean, the league union crossover thing at the juniors has been a narrative for quite a while, and something that I'm surprised no one else seems to pick up on it. Like, we spoke about it a lot on this podcast. I don't hear that as much of a thing elsewhere, probably because a lot of the ingrained, I guess, I don't know if it's biases, but just ingrained ideas in Kiwi sports is about how that's a competition, like league and union are fighting each other for players. Where actually they're sharing them. Like it's you can view the same thing through 2 different lenses, but one is one is probably more accurate than the other, but the same evidence can give you either idea upon it.
But just quickly on that, so like I can say that a lot of the Warriors squad played first 15 rugby.
Yeah.
But it's a weird one, because if you like shout that from the top of the bridge, it'll be like, well, it hasn't worked in the past. That's why I threw up the Conrad Hurrell, the Solomon Kata, those type of examples, because those dudes didn't have a rugby league background, whereas a lot of the kids growing up in Aotearoa throughout Auckland, the regions, I mentioned 2 players from the Junior Crusaders Academy, the dynastic Crusizzlers. Their junior academy, 2 of their players are playing SG Ball footy, and both also played rugby league in Christchurch. Booyakasha. Let's get to another dynastic Aotearoa sporting organisation, the Aotearoa Breakers. They are 3rd in the NBL. All but locked in for finals basketball, and they have 2 games this weekend. Let me just double check. They got the Illawarra Hawks Thursday night tonight over in Sydney, I believe, and then they're in Brisbane. So the Illawarra Hawks are last, Brisbane are second to last. And to me, that sounds like a glorious celebration of Breakers basketball this weekend. Don't want to get cocky here because anything could happen, but am excited about this. We know that the Breakers have this identity that is led by their overseas imports. We've talked a lot about it during the season. Derek Pardon, Barry Brown, Jarrell Brantley. Those dudes lead like a really gritty, defensive-minded identity and team culture, team first, all of that stuff. It starts with your overseas imports, because if they're buying in, everyone else is there as well. We also know there's guys like, you've talked a lot about Isaiah Moriahuhu-Liafa. We've had a bit of Tommy Vodanovic yarn as well. You've got Abercrombie's always in the mix. You've got a couple of other Aussie imports, McDowell White, Glidden still does some things. I'm curious about, like, who are some of the Breakers' depth players? Now, again, we don't want to get cocky here, but I think you might see a few more depth players get minutes this weekend, Thursday night. Did I say it was Thursday night? Yeah, I did. Yeah, Thursday night in Sydney against Illawarra, and then Saturday in Brisbane. Don't want to get cocky here and say the Breakers are just going to let everyone, the Breakers are going to do a Black Caps going to India. Just going to Williamson, Southey, stay home. Trent Bolt, even if you're thinking about playing, don't play, bro. It's all good. Breakers might do a bit of that and give some depth players opportunities to help inform us, myself, and the listener about some of these Breakers depth players. Break it on down for us. Like, who are you eager to see play in these two games? Let's start with that one.
Who am I eager to see play? I mean, I kind of want them to go hard at these games and make sure they win both of them in a way. So I kind of want to see all the top dudes. But I agree, like 2 games in a quick row, and you've got to prepare for finals as well. They're at least going to make that. But
let me set it up.
Big deal whether they can finish second or third, though.
So Breakers have like a 20-point lead halfway through the third quarter. Yeah. Who are the depth players who are entering the game and getting a bit more game time ahead of finals when they might be required?
Well, who's injured at the moment is half the issue. Let me check the last thing. But I would say, honestly, like the Kiwi dudes, pretty much. Someone like, I think Cam Glidden is a good example of an Australian fella who he doesn't necessarily play, but sometimes he will play decent minutes. Like he's a little bit of a matchup style. I'm just looking at their win over Melbourne last time. Glidden played 2 minutes. Vodanovic only played 3 minutes. He's similar. Timmins played 1 minute. Dan Fodu played 1 minute, and Timmins probably right at the very end. I remember Timmins playing at the very end. So there's dudes like that who are definitely at the bottom of the depth chart, in admittedly a small squad. So everyone needs to be ready to go. Everyone needs to be available to and good enough to contribute. But there's a little bit of a, like, I think Timmins and Fotu in particular are the kind of guys you will see if it is, like you say, 20 points up and kind of cruising. You might see those guys in that situation. And, Timmins, very good defensive big man, great rebounder. Fotu is quite a skilled player out on the wing, sort of, forward, power forward, small forward type. He hasn't played very much at all this season. So it's a little bit hard to talk about him in an NBL context because he was injured for a lot of the start. And since he's come back, he's kind of been like the 12th man in a 12-man roster kind of thing. But definitely Tom Vodanovic is someone who, in the right matchup, for example, let's say you're up against a team with solid big man and Pardon gets in foul trouble. You might want Tom Vodanovic to suddenly, even though he might have only played 3 minutes last game, he might be the dude who needs to play 20 in the next game or 15 or something like that. Like, and playoff basketball, 15 minutes, there are no weak minutes. There's no garbage time minutes. It's playoff basketball. It's the best teams against the best. any amount of court time you get, you need to be able to contribute throughout that. So Vodanovic is someone who I think fits into that mold, and I'll chuck Liafa in there again as well, who is going to get a solid 15 to 25 minutes every game, but he's alternating between starting or the bench depending on if Brown is starting, depending on if Will McDowell White is available, which he should be. Now he's had an injury or two earlier in the season, but I was actually looking at the last one. It looks like Repair started as well, which is also a little bit of a matchup thing. Do you want that rangier defender, or do you want the smaller, more sort of on-ball type defender who will give you... Well, actually, Repair's shooting's been decent this season. I wouldn't mind checking that up. Repair might actually also fall into this thing. Like the guys we're talking about are guys who are obviously good, solid role players. Everyone can chip in and do a job. The coach knows what they can expect out of them, but what they offer isn't necessarily for every matchup. So it's a little bit of like, who are you playing? What's the situation of the game? And are you the core of the Breakers is to rely on their three imports, and that's where it starts from. They want their three imports to be the best three players in any game, and when that's the case, they win. Like they win games. If Pardon's playing well, Brantley's playing well, and Brown's playing well all together, that's the key to victory. When one or two of those guys suddenly aren't, maybe one's having an off shooting night, or like I say, foul trouble is definitely a thing that those guys run the risk of, then you start having to dip into other guys. And when you go away from that formula, it suddenly becomes like this result's up in the air. Like I think the plan A hasn't worked. How do we move around that? And one of the key things is these guys we're talking about, your depth players, being able to step up when the game is, like in the balance. Like when it's a little bit, this isn't quite going the way we hoped it would. Someone needs to change something. A guy like Liafa in particular is definitely someone who could just, get 3 or 4 steals in a game, or just hit a couple 3-pointers in a row and just bring that energy and change things. Vodanovic with his Vodanovic can shoot 3-pointers. He can defend well enough. But I think the thing that helps him change the course of a game is just his energy, just his attitude out there, because he's a mongrel of a basketball player, one of those dudes who you love to have on your team. And he'll make a play and he'll celebrate the play. He'll love it. And he'll just, bring the vibes. That's Tommy V for you. He did it on a championship team last year. He's hopefully going to do it on a championship team again this year. So there's, a major problem with the Breakers in the last few years, and there were many of those. It's not like one thing was the only problem. They shot themselves in the foot in many, many ways. But one aspect was that they just didn't have a deep enough team, and they didn't have the caliber. Well, they didn't have the caliber of imports to start, but they also didn't have the caliber of role players to be able to fill in if the imports aren't on their game. This season they do, and that's one of the very important ways in which they have been able to go from. And I still think it's astounding. Like, I still don't think it's getting enough recognition. Really, this team was wooden spooners last season, and they weren't just wooden spooners by accident. They were wooden spooners by a long way. Obviously, there were some things out of there, like being stuck in Australia the whole time is not going to be conducive to good basketball, but it went beyond that. Like, they would have been losing home games too, the way they were playing. Everyone was depressed. Everything looked terrible. They couldn't defend. They couldn't shoot. Suddenly, it's just the polar opposite. And it's nuts how that has changed. It's insane. And I don't see how anyone could not think Modi Mayor is the coach of the year. But, that remains to be seen. We'll see how that goes with the expert votes. But the job that he's done to change things around is astonishing to me.
Folks should be excited to see Alex McNaught if he plays. Averages 5 minutes,
DP,
which is you're basically looking like Rob Lowe averages 12 minutes, Sam Timmins averages 4 minutes, and then you got McNaught who averages 5.5 minutes or so. Very
doesn't
busy,
play every game, so yeah.
Very busy guard who lots of energy. He's going to be part of that defensive intensity as well. Look for him off the bench. And that what you're saying about the depth, just looking at some of the depth players, Rob Lowe, Sam Timmins, Tommy V.
I should have counted Rob Lowe in that list as well, because he's another one whose minutes fluctuate a lot depending on the matchup.
They're all big men. And Rob Lowe can shoot. Tommy V can shoot. Sam Timmins is more of a hustle grind big man. But like if you're thinking about depth and Breakers depth, they got depth in different ways. They've got the big man depth, they got the energy depth, they got the wing depth because you got Repair, you got Abercrombie. You mentioned Fotu. Is Fotu like Vodanovic is kind of like a wing big man, stretch forward type of player, and then Fotu, is he more of a Repair light?
Yeah, I would say that's probably a fair comparison. And the other thing about all these depth dudes can defend. It's like that. That's the hardest thing to find. Is often when the teams go to their bench, it just becomes a shootout. Like everyone run the court, quick shots and shot early and shot clock stuff like that, because that's a way to manufacture offense. But Breakers don't need to do that because they can continue to grind with their second unit out there. And I don't see too many teams who can do that. Although I think it probably is much more of a trait in the Australian Basketball League than it is in most world leagues, I would suggest.
The Repair stuff is interesting because he is the NBA prospect in this team, and nothing's going to boost your draft stocks like being part of a winning organization. And his skill set could be highly influential in finals basketball, where you're looking for a switchable defender, someone who can shoot if they need to. Also, I've seen him dribble the ball pretty well. He can do his own things as well. He doesn't need other blokes just to pass him the ball. And most importantly, he is following the lead from the other overseas imports. Like Repair as a NBA prospect, as a youngster, he is bought into this identity. He is bought into his role as an overseas player and helping to establish this identity, which when you're thinking about NBA prospects is really impressive because there's a bit of mana there. He's not just using this as a stopover to flash his skills. He wants to play winning basketball, and I like a bit of that.
Yeah, I might write a little bit on him in the email tomorrow, come to think of it, because I'll be curious to look at some of his underlying stats, like the more advanced stuffs, the net ratings and things like this, and see how he stacks up. Because I know that it didn't look good in the start of the season before his injury. It feels like he's been a lot more. Obviously, anytime he plays, people are going to be like, "Yeah, look at the skill set, look at the potential, look what he could do." But it's not just that. Like you also have to influence a winning team in a positive way rather than a negative way. And I don't know that the cash outweighed the flash in the first phase of the season. It feels like it has in the second, so I'll be interested to see how that stacks up, because definitely the previous Knicks stars they've had did not. They may have looked good. They may have put up, sexy highlights and whatnot. They also didn't help the Breakers win in any way, shape, or form. In fact, they made them more likely to lose games by, the naive plays and the stuff outside of the highlight reel things. So I was curious to see what that looks like if I have a peek at that.
All flash, no cash. You want a bit of cash over the flash. We had a little chuckle prior to recording the podcast about the Melbourne Victory, and they feel like a A-League dynastic team off the top of my head.
Yeah, Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC have always been the two, haven't they?
And this season, the Melbourne Victory are rooted at the bottom of the ladder. Love a bit of this. They are dead last, 12th. Wellington Phoenix are 4th. And the Wellington Phoenix play Melbourne Victory on Friday evening. I think the Melbourne Victory, their downfall coincides with, no Costa Barbarouses, no Marco Rojas, underrated Kiwis as part of a dynastic organization. But the Wellington Phoenix are facing Melbourne Victory this weekend. We got no women's Wellington Phoenix footy this weekend. They got a bye. And we're coming off 2 epic weekends of Wellington Phoenix footy. Let's be honest here. They had the 2 wins on the same day, which was pretty epic. Then they had the mana-raising performances with red cards and fighting hard for solid results last weekend. Melbourne Victory are last, so we might not need to dive too far deep into this game, but are you excited about a Wellington Phoenix versus Melbourne Victory matchup after like some really grisly performances. Maybe this is an opportunity to bit of flash, bit of cash.
Yeah, I don't know what their history is away to Melbourne, but I'm assuming it's not very good. I'm just assuming if you check the record books, Wellington Phoenix away to Melbourne Victory, probably a lot more losses than even draws, let alone wins. So it does seem like a nice opportunity to add something to that and be handy. But I think the key point with the Wellington Phoenix this year is I almost think it doesn't matter who they're playing. Like it's just sort of whoever, okay, who's up next, right? We'll take you two, sort of thing. Like they have a very, I mean, Ufuk Talay is definitely flexible in terms of like a little tactical tweak to target something, a weakness in the opposition, or to protect a weakness of his own against a certain opposition, kind of thing. Like he'll do those things, but they've also got a very set style of how they like to play. They're one of those like, well, we focus on our own kind of game, and we know that it can be successful against anyone when we get it right. This last month, they've been getting it right more often than not. It'd be nice if they could win by more than one goal or whatnot. Even the game against Perth, like the game flipped once they went down to 10, but there was still some shaky moments where it was like they weren't even like the 2-0 lead. They conceded very soon after they scored the second goal, so they were barely in front for two. It was basically the 1-goal lead. You're always vulnerable with the 1-goal lead. Like you could defend as well as you've ever done, but then some dude just scores an absolute fluke. Like that can happen at any moment in the game. And I will say the header from David Williams for the equalising goal, Phoenix defending with 10 men for all that time, but like what a header that was. The diving header guided into the top of into the top corner, perfectly placed, heaps of power on it, just the athleticism to get to it at all. Bummer that it was a former Phoenix player who had to do it, but he's actually scored a lot of goals against the Phoenix in his time. Great header, great. Like as an equalizing goal, it's not going to get the highlights that an acrobatic volley or a long range shot would do, but it's just as good. It's just as difficult to score from there as it is from those other areas. So like, that was the red card made them more vulnerable, but it was also something they came very close to doing against Sydney, was not holding that lead, where they had the 2 red cards in that game. And even against Central Coast, or who's the 1-0 win in between was against Brisbane. Like these were all 1-goal victories. So in any one of those games, something like they might have got one of those games, they got 2 dodgy red cards and still won, but that could have happened in another game and not been the case. They could have not won that game against Sydney. That they're very fine margins, even though they're playing very well and they're finally getting the results to reflect that. And I do believe they've turned a corner in terms of being able to close out a lot of these games, stop throwing away so many leads as they were. I don't see the fact they blew a lead against Perth as being reflective of the early season problems with throwing away leads. I think it's just that was a little bit of a freak instance where they had a dodgy red card and had to deal with that for a while, and against the team who are playing pretty well themselves, Perth. Like Perth have been in good form, and one dude who's been in very, very good form for them is Keegan Yelisic, who's a dual international in terms of his eligibility, but has played for New Zealand in I think it was under 17s. I think his under 20s wave might have been the one that didn't happen because there was a COVID. One of the tournaments got cancelled because of COVID. I think that might have been his under 20s wave. I'm not 100% sure, but he is eligible for the All Whites and he has played youth level for New Zealand in the past. So definitely one to keep an eye on, and maybe someone to give a little bolster, like bring him into the squad in March when the All Whites next play, just to push back any ideas of maybe the Australians getting us there first, like get in there before anyone else. But yeah, back to the Phoenix idea. I just think they've made big strides. The next thing is to start scoring a few more goals to reflect that, so that they're 2 or 3 goals up going into the last 10 minutes. And if they get a dodgy red card, you can cop it. Like you've got a little bit more wiggle room in that case. They haven't got to that stage yet. So it's a work in progress, but we know they're good enough. this is a really strong team, and they were underperforming at the start of the season. Had they not been thrown away them points, they'd be right up there, probably. Well, they'd be in second place, but they'd be probably very close to potentially going first. Like they've put performances up that justify where they are on the ladder, justify them continuing to rise up the ladder. It's just, you also need to put the finishing touches on those performances. So as much progress as they have made over the last month, there is still room to go. And this is, win away against a potentially struggling Melbourne Victory side. Not the worst opportunity to do some of that, to hammer it home a bit, to not just win a game, but like not scrape through with a 1-0 this time. Actually, like 3 or 4-1 or something like that. Really make a statement, really give yourself a bit of room. And one of them, just one of those comfortable victories, which has been lacking over their uptick in form so far.
What's doing with the All Whites coaching situation?
I don't know, and I'm not sure anyone knows. I'm trying to get my head around this as much as anyone. Like, as far as to lay it out, right? So Danny Hay gets told he's not going to be given a new contract, and he gets upset about that, and the PR machine gets to work. Ironically, if he had just reapplied for his job, he might have got it now. given all the candidates they seem to be losing, he might have just got his job back anyway. You just don't treat it as an ego hit, because at what point did he actually do enough to justify getting re-signed? I would say at no point. Like, good progress, good solid progress, but the kind of progress that another coach could just pick up and take further. It's not like it was unique to Danny Hay. Like, he didn't qualify for the World Cup, and his team didn't score a goal for like the last 4 or 5 games that he was in charge for. So don't see that as re-signing ability, but I do see that like there's some gas in the tank there for if you reapplied, you would still be considered, kind of thing. Like, you've done enough for that. You just haven't done enough to be automatic. But he didn't want to do that, so they moved on. They advertised the position. As far as I can understand, they had 5 candidates. They had former assistant Darren Baisley, probably the least attractive of the candidates. Paul Nevin, who is on David Moyes' coaching staff at West Ham, so he's probably going to be out of a job soon. No wonder he's looking for something else. Has also done some assistant work with Gareth Southgate's England squad. It seems to be quite a well-regarded dude, and coached the New Zealand Knights or the Auckland Kings. I can't remember which one, but he coached one of them right at the very start of his coaching career, sort of 15 odd years ago. Obviously come a long way since then. He's another one who's on the list. Des Buckingham, obviously coached youth grades throughout New Zealand teams, and also multiple time caretaker manager for the Wellington Phoenix. He would have been my pick, and it sounds like he was probably the pick of New Zealand football, or at least would have been high in contention, but he chose to re-sign with City Football Group, staying with his coaching job in Mumbai. But I don't think you can read that as him picking to coach in the Indian Premier League over coaching New Zealand. I think you pick that as him choosing to stay within City Football Group, who are very internal about how they do things. Like, they don't just have all these clubs around the world so that they can loan out players between them. They have them because they're also doing the same with coaching development. And the best example of that is Melbourne City's Patrick Koznorbo did a great job coaching Melbourne City, and then they take him from Melbourne City and give him a job in France, where he's now coaching a top division team in France. Des Buckingham is on that same escalator, and he wants to stay on that escalator. And I can understand that, but it's disappointing because I would have had him as my first choice. Ufuk Talay is another one. Ufuk Talay is clearly a good enough coach to do the job. I am skeptical about the whole job splitting thing between the Phoenix and the All Whites. I do feel like those are 2 full-time jobs, and either you have some absolute gun assistants, or it's just too much for one person to do. And I see that as detracting from him. I think they might come back around at this point. And then the other option was John Herdman. John Herdman lived in New Zealand for a while, coached in New Zealand for a while, coached the Football Ferns for quite a while. He was the coach before Tony Reddings took over. His son, Jay Herdman, was born in Invercargill, and last year committed to play for the under-19s in the Oceania championship, which they won, and I think he was actually given the Player of the Tournament award. He's a pretty handy player. He's on the Vancouver Whitecaps sort of academy thing. John Herdman left the Football Ferns to coach the Canadian women's team, and then he left the Canadian women's team to coach the Canadian men's team, and he coached the Canadian men's team to their best ever World Cup qualification, where they finished first ahead of Mexico, ahead of USA, to qualify for the last World Cup, where he took them there as well. Didn't do so well at the World Cup, but they're co-hosting the next one in 2026. I was quite shocked when all of a sudden there's these reports saying that John Herdman has supposedly agreed to be the. It was a little bit shaky about like New Zealand Football wouldn't name names, but enough journalists from different organizations are reporting that, yeah, they mean John Herdman, for it to obviously be the case that it was John Herdman, who then, like, so yesterday we've got this whole like, New Zealand Football can't announce him yet because he's got their preferred candidate has a family issue that needs to be taken care of, but verbal agreements are in place, nothing is signed, but we're confident that we've got our man, he's the candidate we most wanted, and he's agreed in principle to take over. And then today, Canadian Football put out a big statement from John Herdman, as well as a few others, saying, I'm completely committed to Canada. I've rejected the offer from New Zealand and I'm staying where I am. At which point, I don't know what's going on. It was John Herdman, from all I can gather, it was John Herdman that New Zealand Football were thought they had wrapped up. Be curious to know if there actually was a family issue or if this is just his excuse for wavering for a little while he decided things. I'm also curious about the fact that he seems to be under contract up until the next World Cup already. So I don't feel like this is a negotiating tactic from Herdman in terms of like getting more money out of Canada or anything, because he's already under contract. It seems weird. But also I wondered, would New Zealand Football have paid out his contract, or would they have not had to? I don't know how that works, but surely they wouldn't have had the cash to pay out for 3.5 years worth of contract from a bigger, much more populous nation. The whole thing's just, there's something fishy, and I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something off about it. I don't know entirely how it might just be that John Herdman himself was being a little bit devious. And there was a hint that maybe he might have done this. I haven't looked into this, but he did flirt with taking the England women's job a few years ago, which might have been a similar thing of like, show me how much you love me, Canada, because I could leave if I need to, kind of tactic. I don't know. I don't know how he operates. I don't know if that's the case or if it's just New Zealand Football jumped the gun and suggesting that they thought they had their guy and they didn't. That also can't be ruled out. But the bottom line is he's not going to be the All Whites coach, and that means the two best options are off the table. What do you do now? I think as much as the idea of splitting the two jobs is quite distasteful to me, to the point of almost being a deal breaker, I'm going to live in that almost space and say, I think you just got to go with Ufuk Talai, because I don't think you can now get anyone who A, has the connection to New Zealand football, which all those 5 candidates did, and B, has that level of coaching ability. I think you can get a good coach who's well versed in the Kiwi system, or you can get a very good coach who's not versed in the Kiwi system. I don't think you can get both unless it's Ufuk Talai now. So I think they might just have to bite the bullet and go back to Uffy and be like, you know what? We've changed our minds. I don't know if you've been reading the paper, but the job's still available and you can have it if you want it. I think that's the best course of action. Whether that happens, who knows? Because nothing about this has been predictable. They said they were going to announce a new coach before Christmas. They started advertising it in like November. Then they said, well, we've had some delays. We'll announce it early in the new year. It's February now. Like it's been a month and a half since they thought they were going to have finished this process, and it hasn't happened. And we're actually potentially no closer to finding a solution. We're further away than we were yesterday. So yeah, I don't know about that one. I don't know what's going on at NZF headquarters, but I imagine there's a lot of frantic people this morning.
It does have the quintessential smell of New Zealand football.
Yeah. Yeah, a different type of smell to the old Andy Martin days, but
Yeah, that
a
was a
similar
stench.
smell. That was a stench of that was incompetence plus something else. I'm not sure how to describe it. Like there was a definitely a bluster of we know what we're doing better than anyone else, and it turns out that they didn't. I don't see that from the current New Zealand football thing. I think they feel a bit more like an organization that's trying to rebuild itself and isn't entirely sure of their footing. And has, in fairness, has been doing some very good things over the last couple of years. I mean, you can't. We're co-hosting the Women's World Cup in 6 months. Like that's as big as it gets. That's enormous. It's the biggest thing that's ever happened to New Zealand football, really. So it's not like they've been going backwards, but this would be a setback in their reputation as much as anything if it turns out they've actually botched the thing and they thought they had a dude who just was never that committed. But it could be the other way because the weird thing is it just seems like the John Herdman statement this morning ruling himself out saying he's rejected the offer. And I fully expect that that's also a case of as emphatic as he sounded in that statement, is probably not as emphatic as he actually was. I think that's the kind of thing you say after you've rejected the offer is no, I never had any intention of taking it. You tell the team you're staying with, you tell them that after you've considered leaving and then decided not to. You tell them, no, I'm fully committed and I always was. That's just to protect your current job sort of thing. But it seems like Canadian side of things were completely caught off guard by the idea that he would even consider leaving. The Canadian fans and Canadian reporters as well. No one seemed to think it was even a possibility. And it also seems like New Zealand football has been quite caught off guard by Herdman rejecting them. So somewhere in between those two things, there's an objective truth that we don't know what it is. But that's what I'm confused about, is it just seems like both parties thought there was a reality that wasn't the case. I don't know what the actual thing in between those 2 points is.
Just quickly, do you think New Zealand football were realistically pursuing John Herdman, or was that inferred by external parties? It wasn't actually a factual thing, but other people were alluding to that as the most realistic possibility, whether it was or wasn't.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like whether people have joined dots further than they should have.
Because it just
but I don't think that's the case though. He said he rejected the offer. I mean, he didn't say he declined to put his name forward. He applied for the job, like to be in the 5 list thing. He applied for the job, which means he must have gone through the interview process. So whether he was asked to apply or not, I don't know. But he still did it. Even if he wasn't entirely serious about it, he still went through the process. He did the interviews. He would have spoken to players and stuff like that. Because I know Chris Wood and Joe Bell in particular they sat in on, because Ufuk Talai said this. He explained a little bit of the process of how the interview worked for him, and he said Joe Bell, Chris Wood, as player representatives, were sitting in on I assume the Zoom calls because they would have been on the other side of the world. But they sat in on it, they were part of this thing as well. So there's a level of commitment it takes to get to the point where they're willing to offer you the job. So he said like I said, in his statement, he says he rejected the offer from New Zealand football, where you only get to an offer if you've gone through everything before that. So he obviously showed an inkling. And I think New Zealand football, it sounds like they were genuine in believing that he was genuine. It just, like I say, something's missing. There's a piece to the puzzle that hasn't been filled in yet, and I don't know what it is.
I would Ufuk Talai seems like a good coach, and he doesn't I think all these coaches are very proud of their abilities, but Ufuk Talai, realistically, the other dude has had reasonable success as an international football coach. He's gone to a World Cup, so I'm sure Ufuk Talai can see with some level of self-awareness, he might be able to see the pecking order here, and it won't be a massive wait, you rejected me, now you want me type of situation.
A Danny Hayes situation.
Yeah, if you've got a bit of self-awareness, you know that you're the Wellington Phoenix coach in New Zealand as opposed to a coach who has gone to a World Cup. There's, not to say Ufuk Talai isn't as good as the Canadian coach.
But the CVs don't compare.
Yeah, that's the reality. We'll chuck the we'll just shout out the Flying Kiwis. We'll just say read your Flying Kiwis yarn, and we'll move on. That
Yeah,
is
it's all in
live.
there.
As always, massive deep dive into the Kiwi footballers performing around the world. Check that out on our website, the niche-case.com. Remix. Because we've got to do some Super Smash here. Last weekend of Super Smash cricket, I did mention the Wellington Blaze. They are undefeated this season, 8-0. And I was interested in, I was curious to see that Sophie Devine didn't score any runs. So Wellington are 8-0, and Sophie Devine played 2 games, didn't really score any runs. She did take 5 wickets because she's fantastic at cricket, but she didn't score any runs, and we know Sophie Devine absolutely smacks boundaries in the Super Smash. So Wellington are undefeated with minimal contribution from Sophie Devine. They face Auckland this weekend, and because Wellington are undefeated, they don't need a win. They're 10 points clear of Canterbury, who are in second. And what's interesting this weekend is we have 2 games between Canterbury and Otago. Saturday in Christchurch, Monday in Dunedin. So Women's Super Smash, Canterbury is second, Otago is third. So those games are going to be really interesting. And then Wellington play against Auckland are fourth on 18 points, Otago are third on 18 points. So we do have the Northern versus Central game tomorrow, Friday, but those 2 teams are at the bottom of the ladder. They have 1 win between them. Shout out to their 1 win, which is Northern's win because Central hasn't won a game. So the Auckland versus Wellington game is going to be really interesting because Wellington might just continue to dominate. Auckland need a win, but of course there's no White Ferns in this game, and Wellington have the best team even without their White Ferns. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Auckland can rally and compete with Wellington there. And of course, we've got 2 Canterbury versus Otago games, home and away for either team this weekend. Otago probably need a couple victories. Maybe 1 victory would be okay for them to stay in the top 3 if Auckland lose. So massive weekend of Women's Super Smash coming up.
Yeah, I think they're tied, aren't they? Auckland and Otago, but Otago have 2 games to go, and
yeah,
Auckland have 1 game to go. Yeah, they're both on 18 points, which means that great quirk of the Super Smash is that if I should check who's playing in what order. So they're both Wellington Auckland is on Sunday, so the Magicians and Sparks will have played once by then already, and I think that Otago is ahead on what you call them, aren't they? On net run rate, they are indeed. So if Otago beat Canterbury on Friday, Auckland are going to have to do something absolutely magical to be able to catch Otago again, because there's the only team they can catch to get top 3. And to do that, not only would they have to win by a lot, they would have to beat the undefeated team in the competition. So it's tough mahi for the Auckland Hearts, but it's possible. And if Canterbury beats Otago in both these games, then Auckland would get through if they win. If Otago wins one of those 2 games, Auckland would have to win by a lot to overturn like half a point of net run rate. So most likely the situation will be that, well, Wellington is guaranteed through to the final, aren't they? And the elimination game will be Canterbury against probably Otago, like 90% Otago, 10% Auckland chance, something like that. But Canterbury are playing Otago in a double header this week, which means that they would play each other twice, and then they'll probably play each other again a 3rd time in a row next week in the elimination finals. So there's going to be no excuses for bad scouting in that game. One way or another, they should know exactly how they plan to beat the other team come that elimination final, and should have a good idea on what they need to do that.
I'm curious to see if the under-19 players return to the Super Smash. The only Kiwi
is a point.
Georgia Plimmer was in the T20 under-19 T20 World Cup team of the tournament. She was the best Kiwi batter. She's with the White Ferns now. And then there's other, obviously, players who will scatter back into Super Smash, I believe. And that's going to be really interesting for Auckland because they might get Izzy Gaze back. And the Auckland White Ferns hole isn't as big as it might appear because Fran Jonas, she was pretty solid in her Super Smash stint. But Molly Penfold and Lauren Down weren't dominating Super Smash. So when we're thinking like Susie Bates leaves Otago, holy cow, what are Otago going to do to maintain their high level of performance without Susie Bates? Lauren Down wasn't scoring Super Smash runs. Molly Penfold wasn't really taking Super Smash wickets. And now they come up against Wellington where like Auckland's best players are Sachi Shari, very talented batter, and Amy Hucker, talented all-rounder as well. And you've got some solid players like Holly Huddleston, Arlene Kelly, Katie Perkins is a veteran, but they don't, like, even with all the White Ferns missing, Auckland doesn't really have the talent to defeat Wellington, but they might do something here, especially considering like Wellington have bolstered their team with Laura Harris and Charlie Knott from the Women's Big Bash League Brisbane Heat team. So Auckland might get some under-19 players back and they might, pull something out of their sleeve and get an overseas import or two to balance out the ledger against Wellington, but I don't know if they will. So that's going to be...
Arlene Kelly won't be there either, will she? Because she's in the Island squad for the T20s.
Holly Huddleston has been really good with the ball, and Amy Hucker has been really good with the ball as well. Like, I think Amy Hucker's their best bowler or second best bowler, so watch out for her. But like Wellington don't have a White Ferns hole.
No.
Because they still have Lee Kasperek, Rebecca Burns, players behind me. Tamsin Newton, Zara Jetley, Jess McFadden, they're all really good. But these overseas imports that they have, like Laura Harris, favorite stat, she had a batting strike rate of over 200 in the Women's Big Bash League. In her first game of Super Smash, she had a strike rate over 200. Like, that's ridiculous. And that is just straight up bullying. And I don't know if Auckland's bowling attack is going to be too fond of Harris or Charlie Knott, because Charlie Knott also smashed a lot of boundaries in her debut for Wellington. And Auckland don't really have a great batting unit either, whereas Wellington have the best spin bowlers in Super Smash, Lee Kasperek, Zara Jetley, and Nicole Beard, who has done fantastically well in her first dose of Super Smash cricket. So that is the most interesting game. As you said, like Otago and Canterbury might play each other a third time in a row. So I'm kind of just curious to see what happens there. I'm not looking forward to those two games as much as the Wellington-Auckland game. But then that Wellington-Auckland game might just be a dominant Wellington win and they cruise along. With regards to Canterbury and Otago, Canterbury only lose Leah Tahuhu. Still got Amy Satterthwaite, still got Kate Anderson, still got Gabby Sullivan, Missy Banks, who are the best seamers in Aotearoa right now. So they lose Leah Tahuhu, but they have the two best seamers in Super Smash, for what it's worth. So that is really interesting. And you just got a tripping out here. Otago, they lose Hayley Jensen, they lose Susie Bates, and Eden Carson, love a bit of Eden Carson, fantastic cricketer, but they still have Kate Ibrahim. And they've also, they do have some inputs, but they've got experienced players with Felicity Layden Davies, she moved down from Northern a few seasons ago. And I think you've got Chatterjee. She might be a Scottish international, I don't know. But Otago are just a really good outfit themselves. On the men's Super Smash, so we got Canterbury and Otago double banger again. Same fixtures as the women's Super Smash. This time, though, Canterbury and Otago are first and second on the Super Smash ladder. They both have 20 points. Northern versus Central, the Friday game, is a matchup of the two middle table teams on 18 points. So that is the most important game, I believe, in the Super Smash men's side. Central versus Northern Friday afternoon. and you've got a Wellington versus Auckland game. Auckland probably not going to make the finals, but they could if mathematics proves to be useful. I don't know. Bit of mathematics, never hurt anyone, but Auckland.
Well, Wellington's net run rate is better than Northern's or Central's right now, but Northern and Central playing each other, aren't they? So someone has to get points out of that game, or they both get one or whatever from a split or however it works. So I think Wellington's out. I don't think they can get there because while they could catch up one of those teams and go up to fourth, someone else is going to have to win and they will be above 18 points. And then that's that, which means that Brave Stags game is literally a quarterfinal. Like it's the winner goes through to the elimination final, which is basically the semifinal.
And that is a fascinating matchup because you got Northern. They know what to do in the Super Smash. And when I was rolling through the Deep in the Mangroves on the variety show, like same idea of the young and the middle class applies to Northern because they got the Kay Clarks, Cartony Clark, Christian Clark, Tim Pringle's quite a good young cricketer as well. But their batting unit, like Cartony Clark is Northern's Finalen. He just goes Burko at the top. And you've got G. Raval, the test opener. He's there. Henry Cooper, Joe Carter. Those type of lads are in that Northern batting unit. Tim Seifert opens with Cartony Clark. So their batting is quite experienced and they have the winning Super Smash formula. They've done it before, sure, with some black caps or, other things that are in their favor, whatever, but they know how to win games in the Super Smash. They've got a very good spin unit. You might get Neil Wagner playing his second game of the season, second game since like 2017-18, whatever the fuck that was. Tim Pringle, Dutch spinner. Joe Walker rips his offies. Curious to see if he plays. Like Christian Clark bowling. He's a very good cricketer. Scott Kugelein's in the mix as well. So Northern, they are a very good Super Smash team, and this is a must-win game. Central, well, you just got Will Young, Latutu Taylor, Tom Bruce, Ajaz Patel and Jaden Lennox. Jaden Lennox, leading wicket taker. They might have a little seam bowling hole if you don't get any Seth runs. He hasn't played in a bit, and Latutu Taylor had an injury in his last outing, but Central are just a fantastic team. Let's see where this game is played. Hamilton. So that's in Northern's favour as well because they love playing in their home conditions. But you always get plenty of runs in Hamilton as well. So Northern, well, they'll probably stack up their spin attack. And then their spin attack's coming up against the lefties of Patel and Lennox. Beauty.
And if it does rain in that game, which is still a possibility, sort of got to be a possibility in any Super Smash game, any cricket game this summer. It just seems to be the way it's gone.
It might rain today, anywhere.
It could rain at any point, and it could just absolutely bucket down too. I mean, Northern have played 9 games, but their win-loss record is 3-3. So let's see, 2 abandonments and 1 no result. So they've literally only played 2/3 of their games, like 3 wins, 3 losses, and 3 games that didn't finish. Couple of them didn't start. Like, that's probably the main reason they're in this position. Like, they've played some of those games. They might well have won some more of those games, or maybe not, but it would have been more like Central of 4-4, having played the same amount of games, Northern of 3-3. So there's a bit of the old, like, the weather gods have maybe held Northern back. But also, if this game does get abandoned, Northern have the superior net run rate. So that would also be a win for Northern. That would put them into the elimination final. So Central really need it to not rain. Not only do they need it to not rain, but they need to win and overtake the Northern Brave. And I mean, this is game of the season across all of the tournament. Like, this is as big as it gets. Like, they're tied on the thing. One, if you win, you advance. If you lose, you're out. And they're 2 really exciting teams with a lot of big hitters and some, just dudes in really good form at the moment. And this is when exactly is this game? I should chuck that out so people know to. Nope, that's the wrong one. Monday. No, that's Ford Trophy. I'm looking at the wrong one. Friday, Northern Brave Central Stags at 6:40 p.m. That is prime time on a Friday evening. That's exactly where it ought to be.
Don't think you'll get the Black Caps T20 players straight back into Super Smash. Although, like,
you might not want them to.
But then again, you might get Kane Williamson and Tim Southey for Northern. Like, they might just be taking the piss.
Stacking the deck.
You never know. Central have been without Doug Bracewell and Dane Cleaver recently as well. So whichever way that game goes with like Big Donny Central or, hearty domestic Grizzly players and young players, fascinating either way. And that goes for the Canterbury-Otago matchups as well. Like, we've talked a lot about Zach Fox, Will O'Rourke. Ben Lockrose had his moment for Otago on their massive win. Dean Foxcroft, the MVP. All those teams have the middle-class players as well. So it'll be interesting. Less excited about that Wellington-Auckland matchup, but curious to see if anyone can stand up for Auckland or Wellington, because they have lacked real pure dominance that you're seeing from the other teams. Yeah.
And should also mention, if Canterbury beat Otago twice, Northern with a win would overtake them into second, and Central could overtake them into second with a win, depending on how bad the net run rate is, like how much that flips over the course of those 3 games, which doesn't change anything in terms of like doesn't change anything in terms of the standings or whatnot, but the elimination final, but it would mean a home game rather than an away elimination final, which, if the difference is between playing in Hamilton and playing in Invercargill or Dunedin, probably a good thing for Northern. Having said that, Otago could also finish first if they can split, because they're tied on points with Canterbury. So those games are pretty big as well. Like, that first versus second is massive. It's similar to the thing with the Breakers saying earlier. Like, the Breakers finish second, they don't have to do the play-in stuff. They go straight to the semi-finals. They finish third, they have to do the play-in stuff. Whoever wins by enough, Canterbury has the superior run rate by a large chunk as it stands, but that'll determine who goes straight to the final and who is in the elimination final.
That's the Niche Cast. Enjoy the platter of Aotearoa sport on offer. Kia kaha, stay beautiful, love yourself, and a bit of cheers all round. Cheer, cheer.